right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a French apple tart. What's a French apple tart? Well, French apple tart is very similar method to doing a normal apple, tart itself. We're going to use a tart pan that looks like this. It has a releasable base to it, so and it's non-stick, which is great. Recommendation I would have would always be to still brush it with some butter. I'm not a big fan of those sprays that you see in stores. If you don't understand what the ingredient is, it's probably not a good thing that you want to be eating it anyway. So definitely try to use butter or an oil. Again, a neutral oil, not something with olive oil especially. So French apple tart, I'm going to go through the whole process. We're going to do it with this pâte sucré, which is a sweet pastry. You can certainly use shortbread pastry as well, or short pastry if you'd like. Cut back on the sugar. And again, the importance of here is the ingredients need really cold butter, ice water, egg yolks, and usually what I'll say to people with eggs is to go a little bit above the norm. So if I say it calls for 3 egg yolks, sometimes I say you might want to increase that to 4, because all depends on the size of the eggs you get. Salt, flour, sifted flour, and sugar, as I mentioned. Okay? So when we come back, we'll go through the process of how to make this, and then we'll talk further about what French apple tart really is. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start. We're going to put the flour, sifted flour, number 1. I'm going to go with the butter. Okay. And I like to get this started first because I'm not looking to really get the sugar immediately, because I find if you start doing that, it almost becomes out like a cookie dough. We don't want to do that. We can certainly add the salt this time. Kosher salt is what this one is. And again, you could certainly do this in a kind of a rogoku as well, if you'd like. And you're just going to pulse it. You're not going to go ahead and start pureeing it for long periods of time, because you want the butter to have almost like the top of your pinky nail. The way the size of that nail is really the kind of piece of amount of butter that I'm looking for. Okay, so put on the attachment, pop it up, turn it on very low. Because all again I'm trying to do is just kind of mix this up, get the cold butter and the flour to work together, break it into small little pieces. In a few minutes I'm going to add the sugar to it, and when we come back I'm going to add the egg yolks and the cold ice water. Alright guys, so this is one of my favorite type peelers. Okay, a lot of people everybody has their own preference. Some people use the one that actually it's got like the longer piece, so you can do this to it. I like this because it actually feels better with my wrist when I'm doing it for long periods of time. Again, you can use a small knife if you're really skilled and you like the idea of doing it that way, you certainly can. But for the purpose of actually taking off exactly what you want to take off, which is a small piece of the skin, as opposed to most of the apple, okay, I just start off by taking the top piece off here like this first. Then I work like this down. And for this particular apple tart, I mean, you can use any local fresh apple that you like. I've always been a big fan of Granny Smith's because I feel like the tartness is what I'm looking for, and the crispiness of the apple is always consistent. What I don't want to do is have this apple be very mushy, because that's not the texture and the consistency that I'm looking for. And when we come back, when we get all this cut, we're going to go ahead and saute off the apples in some butter, and then we're going to add a little sugar to it as well to sweeten it. And again, people say, well, how much? I'm going to put a recipe up on our channel. Like and subscribe, please. And what you will find is like, it really becomes a preference. You have to taste it and figure out what it is you like, as opposed to saying exactly the amount. All right, next thing we're going to add here is the sugar. And I've gotten the mixture now is exactly what I'm looking for, which is, if you can get a close up there, and I know I can turn it down a little bit. It's got just little small specks of butter, which is kind of what I want. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, when we come back, I'm just going to add the egg yolks and the ice cold water. Okay, we're going to go with the egg yolk. We're going to stop it for a second. I'm just going to get that egg yolk onto the paddle, so I get all the mixture in. Okay, Turn it back on. And we're going to go with the cold water. When we come back, this whole piece will start to come together nicely. And we're going to not over mix it. If you over mix it, it's going to make the dough very, very, it's going to really activate the gluten, and you get a really kind of a dense, chewy kind of, pastry, and that's not what I'm looking for. And we're there. All right, guys, so another reason why I like to use the Granny Smith apples is because they tend to not turn, and with the oxidization, room temperature and all that, when it gets exposed, when the skin's taken off, they start to go brown or even black. We don't want that to happen. So another way to prevent it, if you're using a different apple, you can certainly use lemon, and just put some water and put some acidulated water, get some, and then that way you just drop your apples in there. That way you can actually get this done ahead of time. So if you're getting ready to do it before you're going to have this tomorrow night or the day after, like say for example Friday night, you're going to go and have a nice dinner. You can prep this in the morning or the day before, put it in there, just make sure you completely submerge them, and putting some paper towels that sit down on top and actually keep the actual apples under the water. So when you're cutting them, and you'll see, sometimes I'll see like where people will cut and then they'll get too close to the core and they'll get some of that in there. You certainly don't want to eat that. I'm okay if there's a little piece of the skin on that, but I certainly do not want that. So you definitely want to take this out of here, okay? And a French apple tart, and as we'll explain as we go along with the video, it's kind of a cool thing because it's nothing but apples, and the flavor of the sweetness of the apples is really up to you. Okay, so yes, I'll give you a recipe for it, but it really becomes more about the difference of apples that you're using as you taste it. If you're staying away from too much sugar, but you still want to have it, and you're doing a different pastry dough, you're not using with a lot of sugar, that's great. You can certainly do that. The flavor and the seasoning comes from you. More cinnamon, less cinnamon, adding something else that you might like, allspice, whichever. Okay, that's really up to you entirely. Okay, when you puree all these apples, you're going to cook the apples, and we're going to puree them. And then you're going to see from there how beautiful this comes out. All right, guys, butter in the pan. We're warming it up. We want to get it a little bit like a nut brown color almost, right? You do not want to get it too dark. We don't want to get like any burn marks at all. All right, guys, here we go. Got some nice smells coming out of this right now. Granny Smith's cooking in some butter. We're going to hit it with some sugar now. Again, this is really up to you. More, less, that's up to you. Cinnamon. Now we're going to cook these nice and tender. Now, traditionally, when you're making a French apple tart, when these apples are pure, like nice and soft, and it's almost like a puree, right? You can puree them in Roboku. And then what's going to happen is, in the traditional recipe, they would normally add toasted breadcrumbs to this recipe to give you that almost like it feels like a crunch after they cool down. We're not going to do that because I want to keep this. I don't need to add more bread to something like this. I said the flavor's in the apple, so we're just going to keep it the way I like it. And I think you'll agree, when you have this, it's just going to be all apple. And then the decorative top that we're going to put on it is really what makes this and sets it apart. All right, so guys, our pâté sucré all come together. And you're going to find this dough is a little bit more, it's going to be a little harder to roll out sometimes, and that's why you have to make sure it's very cold. So making this in the morning before you need it is probably the best thing to do. You can see, just roll it out like this. And there's little specks of butter. It might be hard to see that on the camera, but there is specks of butter. You can trust me on it. See, that's a speck of butter, which means we didn't overwork it, which is what we want. A little flour. Now, if you're making a real sweet pastry, which has got a lot more sugar in it, normally I would roll this out with confectioner's sugar. I wouldn't use flour because I'm not looking to actually dull the flavor of the sweetness. And again, you get a close-up of this and that. you can actually see the specks of butter. And that's exactly what you're looking for. All right, guys, so we have the dough. I'm using a French rolling pin. It's just my preference. You can use, obviously, some people have the other ones. Turn this off. It's going to be our melted butter for our tart pan. As I mentioned earlier, this is how I like to use. I don't like to use any kind of spray. You really want this dough to be cold. Last thing you want to do is have it stick. Just keep moving it around. It's normal if it starts to crack a little bit. It's a sweet dough, so it tends to have that. But it's also going to be a little easier to roll because, you know, other pastry doughs, less sugar, tend to be a little harder to roll. Like when you're rolling them out, they tend to kind of want to come back together a little bit. That's why you dock them with a knife or something like that to prevent that from the shrinking, or put them in the fridge for a while after you put it into the pan. All right, guys, so being a little delicate, fragile, move this out right here, put it over. And again, if it falls and it starts to break a little bit, don't freak out, it's fine. We can work around it. You're not gonna you don't push. You lift this up and then you move it in. Okay, lift it up here and let the pastry dough fall back down. Okay? If you start to push, you're going to break it off the side, and then you're not going to have it where you need it. Okay, we're going all the way around it. Next thing we're going to do is just go ahead and get it to where we want it here. Make sure everything's this way. Take your rolling pin, do this. Make sure it's all gone. Take it off the sides. You can keep this though. And then I just go back around one more time, push just into the sides just to make sure it's okay. And it's okay if it comes up a little bit, because if it falls, if it does shrink a little bit, you're perfectly in good shape. And that's it. All right, apples going in the mixing bowl. You could use a food processor here. All right, guys, so right now we got the apples in. I'm gonna turn it on a little bit. Break it up. Now, if you like it to be completely pureed, you can. I like the little chunks in there. I just think the texture brings something that's even better for the dessert itself. And then we're just going to put this into the pre-baked pie shell, which I'll demo in a second. All right, guys, so what we're going to do here now, I'm just going to do a little bit of docking. Just kind of prevents the pastry. There's two reasons, really, that pastry chefs do this. Brings out some of the steam, prevents it from shrinking down on you. So we have cut out a piece of parchment paper. This will go in, right? Because we're going to bake this blind. It's called baking blind, which is basically pre-baking the tart shell, because we already have the apples cooked. Okay, so we don't need to be putting it in raw like an apple pie, right? So right here, what we have, and you can use, and a lot of people will use, you'll see in a lot of videos from like before, like beans, dried beans, legumes, stuff like that. They put them in. To me, that's a waste of food, so why would I do that? These are actually food grade stainless bearings. They weigh more, and I can just move them around and I can use them over and over again. And we'll put this in the oven to about 350. Cook it until we get the dough is fully cooked, but very little color. We don't want a lot of color here. We just want it to be cooked. Okay? That's another reason why baking it blind with the parchment paper works out really well on this particular way to do it method. So that's it. It's going to go in the oven, come out, and we'll finish off the tart. All right, guys. So we have a mandolin here. Not sure where this one says it's from. There's different ones you can buy. There's French, there's Japanese. This is a German one. The most important thing to notice and know is that they're very dangerous. Okay, highly, very, very sharp here. I'm wearing a cut glove. I have a guard. I'm gonna make sure that the apple is pretty much on this particular device that they've given us to keep us safe. Go up and down like this, slicing, and when we get to the bottom, that's it. Do not think for 1 minute that it's a good idea to say, well, I've got some apple left, I'm gonna do that. No, this apple can be just put into a Ziploc bag, put in your freezer, and for the next time you make a French apple tart or an apple tart, or an apple jam, whatever you want to make, just keep it in the freezer. Do not take a chance on trying to slice it. All right, guys, so we're just checking this in the oven. You can see here the sides are normally that's always going to go first. It's going to get a little color. Very little though, and the bottom is about maybe 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes away from being done. And as you can see on the right, we've used some bulgur wheat to press down as well, which is something you can use at home. And the good thing with that is you're toasting off the grain. That will make a great salad when you cook it. All right, guys, here we go. Beautifully done. Got a little color to the sides, perfectly cooked here. We're gonna go ahead and fill this with apples and do the sliced apple on top, and you get to see how beautiful this dessert turns out to be. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and spoon this in. Move it around. Try to bring it right up to the top part there. It smells really great. It's got a really nice cinnamon smell to it. And again, it's very important to taste this and get the actual, the sweetness that you're looking for. So it's very, very challenging for me to tell you, like, well, it's going to take X amount, like 100 grams, 200 grams of sugar, when realistically, it's going to be really your preference. And that's that. And you got little chunks in there, which is what we're looking for. And now we're going to go ahead and top it with all of these little sliced apples. And when we come back, you'll see the entire process. So when you're doing this, you want to actually have the apple on this outer layer just hang over the edge a little bit, because it will shrink down. And when it does, it's going to pull back a little bit, so it's going to be the perfect, it's going to actually just be perfectly done around this tart. Last thing we're going to do here, guys, nice and gently, some melted unsalted butter. Just gets put onto the sea of sliced apples. And then what we're going to do at the very, very end is just, before this goes in the oven, we're going to sprinkle it with some sugar. Just to kind of create, I'm going to fix some of these ones that are moving right now in a second. And it is, that's the hardest part about this dessert, is what you just see here, getting it to be beautiful and decorative. You don't have to go as crazy as this, I mean, but, and it's also really cool done as an individual dessert. And I can assure you, your friends come over to the house to see you do this, they're gonna, well, maybe it's a bad idea, because they're gonna want to come over all the time. And lastly, some sugar. Good now? Mm-hmm. All right, a little sprinkle of some sugar on top. I'm gonna put this back into the oven, a few minutes only, get these apples to get a little cooked, and that's it.